Hello, everybody. Andy Jacob here with the DotCom Magazine Entrepreneur Spotlight Series. I have a great show today, an important show. You know, sometimes at DotCom Magazine, we come across something that really is changing the entire landscape of the particular field that they're in. Oftentimes, we find very interesting medical companies, companies that are just reimagining the way that we look at our health. And when HepaTx came across our desk, our entire team said, Jake, you have to reach out to the CEO. His name is Salah Kivlighn, Dr. Kivlighn, of course. He's the chief executive officer at HepaTx. And what they're doing is just incredible. It's regenerative medicine. And what they're doing is they're using stem cell as a basis for treatment for late stage liver disease. There's a lot of other things that they're doing as well, of course. I'm going to be talking above my pay grade here a little bit, but we're going to simplify it for the people viewing the show. But Salah, welcome to the DotCom Magazine Entrepreneur Spotlight Series today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on today. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, what you're doing at HepaTx really resonated for our entire team because liver problems and liver disease is just almost like an epidemic. I think over 30 million Americans or more suffer from the disease. So many people have a challenge that you're trying to solve with this great new, sort of regenerative medicine. But before we get into it all, let's pull the lens back to 30,000 feet and tell us what you're doing at HepaTx.
Well, thanks again. So the problem that we're facing is really quite large and growing. So the other challenge about liver disease is it often goes unnoticed, or it generally goes unnoticed until it's in severe stages, quite late in the disease process. So there are no diagnostic routine screenings and tests to understand if you have it or you don't have it. And according to the National Institute that follows this, as high as 1 in 3 Americans probably has some form of liver disease in an early stage. So recognizing this and trying to understand it more, HepaTx is a company that was formed out of a technology discovered at Stanford University. And it was discovered in the laboratory of Dr. Gary Peltz. And the company was founded by 2 individuals, Eric Schur and Mark Chow, both related to Stanford, were sort of providing mentorship. Mark was actually a fellow at Stanford at the time. And the technology allows us to begin with adipose tissue or fat tissue. And from that fat tissue, we isolate a particular type of cell, an adipose stromal cell. And those cells then can be differentiated to become hepatocyte-like cells or liver-like cells, which can then be administered and hopefully provide a therapeutic benefit. So that's a high level of what we're doing.
Wow, that's so interesting, Dr. Kivlighn. When we think about it and we think about liver failure, I mean, when someone has liver failure at this point in time, is the only solution a transplant? Where are we at right now, sort of in the process?
Yeah, so again, it depends on how you define liver failure. So liver disease occurs, like all diseases, at various stages. So the earlier you catch it, obviously, the better, the more chance of therapy, the more treatment options. Because we are a small company and we had to be very focused with our resources and what we're trying to do, we initially are focusing on alcohol-induced liver failure, if you will, severe liver disease induced by alcohol. That in and of itself is a huge problem in the United States and globally. And I'll digress for a moment because in addition to the existing problem, the problem is increasing and increased rather dramatically during COVID, during the lockdown. There was a global increase in alcohol consumption. And that, we believe, it will lead to a follow-on, that's an early indicator of liver disease to come. In fact, I just finished drafting a letter to the editor on this very topic that we're going to be sending to a medical journal to try and raise awareness around this. So back to your question about severe liver disease. So patients that we are targeting with our lead product candidate, there's essentially no treatment option for them other than transplant. The patients are currently placed on transplant lists and then managed with steroids to reduce the inflammation. And last year, well, there are currently about 106,000 people in the United States waiting on transplant lists for liver. And in 2021, there was approximately 30 or so thousand actually transplanted. So that left over 70,000 individuals waiting who didn't get transplanted, didn't get a liver. And therein lies why we chose to use adipose tissue as a starting material, because other companies in the field often rely on liver donations or liver tissue donations from cadavers. And that, as I just described, is a rate limiting step in this process. And so by using fat tissue, which sometimes I say jokingly is in abundant supply, we're able to have a virtually endless supply of starting material that we can then differentiate down different lineages to become hopefully therapeutic cells for different diseases.
Wow, it's so interesting when you think about it, and you mentioned it's a lot about sort of the pandemic, and a lot of people unfortunately went to the bottle and started drinking more than perhaps they ever had before. And what you're seeing is this evolving into something that becomes a very urgent situation. Is that what we're talking about here with people's livers in the future?
Well, I mean, certainly it's an unknown at this stage, but the analogy is just exactly what you've heard for the last 2 years about COVID. So positive test results are a leading indicator to hospitalizations, and that leads to more people, in the beginning in the ICU and on ventilators. So the increase in alcohol consumption is a leading indicator for the potential for there to be more and more liver disease as we go forward. And this is not just a US problem, as I said earlier. I talk to people all over the world. I talk to folks in China, India, Brazil, lots of European countries. They're all seeing the same thing. So this global increase in alcohol consumption that occurred during the lockdown is of concern. And so what I'm trying to do through the letter to the editor and other channels like this one is raise awareness to that fact that this is happening, and so that we can be prepared to help those patients when they get to a stage that they require that kind of help.
Wow, it's such an important thing that you're doing. And of course, it's very difficult to swallow what has occurred with so many people. Of course, using things to help them get through such a tough time. And then at the end of it, they might even have something that, is just going to be very, very challenging for their health with regard to liver disease. We were researching for the show, Salah, and one thing we didn't know is that some of the research shows that there's over 100 different types of liver disease out there. And we didn't even know that. It's so interesting. And of course, living with long-term chronic liver disease is just a major challenge for people. When we think about it, where are we right now with Cell Therapy Reimagined with the company?
So Cell Therapy Reimagined, what we intend to communicate with those words is this has been tried before, tried by lots of folks, and there's always challenges. And I will qualify that with the drug development process in general is very challenging. It takes a lot of knowledge, a lot of insight, a lot of experience to bring these therapies successfully through the process to get to a marketed entity that can provide a therapeutic benefit. When you look at what we refer to as small molecules, these are the chemicals that you often take when you go to the pharmacy and you get a prescription, you get a pill. Those are relatively straightforward compared to complex biologic molecules like cells. So one of the things about cells is they have multifunctionality. And so what we're trying to do with the Cell Therapy Reimagined, which is different than those that went before us, is we're trying to tailor the functionality of these cells so that they can hopefully benefit a specific pathology or disease. So an example would be that the cells that we begin with naturally can suppress inflammation. So think about aspirin, nonsteroidal anti-inflammatories that suppress inflammation. These cells have that quality, but what we've been able to do is essentially turn that property of the cell up so that it becomes a more effective anti-inflammatory. And in addition to that, they have other features and functions that can be beneficial in different disease settings. So what we try to do through Cell Therapy Reimagined is, if you will, tailor the functionality of the cell to benefit a specific disease or condition, while also being regenerative in nature.
Wow, it's so interesting. Of course, people that know about liver disease and they know about organ transplants, they know that only 1 in 33 receive a transplant that will save their life. So are we saying that the other 32 people don't get a transplant and there's nothing really for them right now to save their life?
Yeah, currently, if you go back and look at all the literature, the only real therapeutic option for these patients when they get to severe end-stage liver disease is a transplant. And as I mentioned earlier, while they're on those lists, they're supported with steroid to reduce inflammation and help to manage that disease. But other than a transplant, there's really very little, if anything, for these patients.
Wow, Salah, that's amazing. Let's break it down a little bit further. Let's get into simplicity just for a moment for the entrepreneurs watching the show. Maybe they've had a family member or someone that they know that have had liver disease. Most likely they have, certainly in their lineage and in their family tree. There's most likely some liver disease because, as you mentioned, it just happens so often and it really is out there in a very big way. From a real simplistic standpoint, let's break down what your therapy will do to the people, to their cells, to help them as an alternative to a liver transplant.
So what we hope to be able to do, because we're still early stage and we're developing this therapy with this potential, our vision is that we would be able to provide, at a minimum, a bridge to a transplant. So the cells would be administered, and without getting too technical, they can be administered via different routes. And after administration, they essentially take up residence in the liver and begin to function like liver cells. So it's supportive to the existing liver, and the liver is also regenerative in nature. So by providing, some of the published literature suggests that 5 to 10% support in that way can allow the liver to regenerate itself and heal itself. Our cells then, once they take residence, and that's referred to as engraftment, once they engraft in the liver, there is evidence also out there to suggest that they will continue to move or differentiate towards liver cells or hepatocytes. So they have the potential to be both therapeutic and regenerative in nature. And then the real dream down the road would be, if the therapy lives up to its potential and what we believe it's capable of doing at one day in the future, you may not need a transplant following this kind of therapy.
Wow, that's powerful. And of course, for the entrepreneurs watching the show, Salah, let's give them a little insight on what it takes to bring something to market when you're in this medical field, because it certainly is not a simple process. You need to have a great team, which you have at HepaTx, of course. How long does it take? What's the process and the steps to get this out into the hands of the physicians that then can treat so many people that really need what you're developing here?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's complicated in a lot of ways, and it can be a little scary for investors, because this isn't like creating a thing that they can test and see if it works and see if they like it. So the numbers to do this takes quite an investment in general and many, many years of work. The art of this is being able to understand the fastest path to that. So traditionally, you've probably heard about people talking about the FDA process of getting a drug approved and registered. There's a phase 1 period. Well, it begins actually in test tubes and in laboratories doing experiments that are referred to as in vitro. So that is not in life. And then the next step is in vivo, which are experiments generally conducted in animals. And there are models of the disease that can be studied in that way. So you characterize a drug or a product in vitro, and then you test it in vivo. And if all of that goes well, and there are no signals about safety, and there is a signal of potential efficacy or benefit, you then can move into human trials. And so then you're looking at phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. And each of those requires a certain number of subjects and a certain set of parameters that you want to follow. The art in this, and whether it is liver failure or oncology or hypertension, is choosing the population of patients that you believe can get the most benefit from what you're testing, and also give what you're testing the opportunity to succeed. And that's why we focused on alcohol-induced severe liver failure initially, because it's an area of large unmet need. And based on what we know about our cells, we believe the cells have an opportunity to provide a real benefit. The other part of going in that direction is that in areas that, like we've been talking about, where there are really no other therapeutic options, the FDA is willing to work with us to help us move through the process a little bit faster. So we have the ability to talk to the agency and work with them and design a set of trials that will get our cells, hopefully, into therapeutic use as fast as possible and with minimizing expense. And that's, since we're talking about entrepreneurship, that's really our mandate to our investors, is to spend their money wisely. So that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, it makes all the sense in the world. And of course, it sounds like it sort of is a fast track system where you have a direct relationship with the FDA and you're moving toward it. The interesting thing that I think as an entrepreneur myself and as an investor is when you invest in something like this, that it really is a meta trend, something that's just gigantic, something that can really solve a huge problem. The potential for the product that comes to market to help so many people really becomes a multi-billion-dollar opportunity. And of course, from the business standpoint, that makes all the sense in the world. But also, besides just a business component, you're really changing people's lives. You're changing their lives in the way that patients are cared for, the way in which they now have an alternative to the liver transplant, which right now only 1 in 33 are receiving. So Salah, when we think about what your company's doing, you must have a lot of great team members that really are focused and passionate about what they're doing, because they know after it's all said and done, God willing, it all works out the way in which you all envision it. This is a real life-changing for the positive type of a thing that you're involved with, right?
Oh, yes, for sure. And, I've been doing this for over 30 years, and I've been fortunate enough to be part of or lead teams that have brought 4 different things to market that benefit people in the areas of hypertension, in the area of oncology, a vaccine that's used for children. And over all those years, all the people that I've ever worked with, the thing they cared about most was the patient. And, you always remember that these people are out there, they're waiting for us to get this work done, to bring this therapy to them. And when I took the job at HepaTx, I was actually retired at the time, and I met the founders of HepaTx on an MIT healthcare conference. And when I decided to unretire and do this, what really inspired me was when I started talking to the physicians who treat these patients and their desire to help these people. And so our team, we're still very, very small, but we have an excellent group of scientists located out in California in Palo Alto. We actually have a small laboratory space directly across the street from Stanford. And I have to acknowledge Stanford as a great partner. They've been so good to us and worked with us in many, many ways. Our co-founders, Eric and Mark, and then we have a business development person who actually is in the Netherlands. So we think of ourselves as a global company because we're East Coast, West Coast, and the Netherlands. But the motivation for everybody at our company, and I will say literally all the people that I've worked with throughout my career, is really about that knowledge that these patients are out there waiting and depending on us. So dollars aside, that's what drives us.
Yeah, Salah, it's awesome. Of course, you have been involved with 4 very successful sort of bring to market experiences. And you mentioned this very interesting word that you unretired. I mean, I love that so much. But again, you said you spoke to the physicians, you spoke to the people at Stanford, you spoke to the people that were passionate about it, and they sold you just really based on their passion. So let's talk about entrepreneurship a little bit, because for the people watching the show that are not in the medical field, one thing that stands out about this conversation, Salah, is you spoke to people that were passionate. And passion goes a long way, because the physicians that were treating these people with late stage liver disease, it just must have been very challenging for them, knowing that only 1 in 35, 1 in 40 of them were going to get the liver transplant really to save their lives. And I would imagine that resonated for you to come back and unretire and come back and lead HepaTx, right?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I heard it in oncology all the time. And, I am not an MD. I don't treat these patients. I'm not at the bedside. I am not dealing directly with them, and I don't deal with their families. But I have heard repeatedly from physicians who do this work how desperately they want to help these patients. And, it has to be really hard to have a patient that you get to a stage where there's no other options for them. You can't help them anymore. And then you have to have those very difficult kind of conversations about, look, we've kind of reached the end of the line here. And our goal is to change that so that there is no more end of the line, so that there is no more of those conversations. And so that's what we do. And I heard this repeatedly in oncology, and I heard this same plea from physicians who treat these patients with liver disease. So it's powerful when you actually talk to those folks.
Yeah, it's powerful. And of course, this is a area that's literally a matter of life and death. And I like how you positioned your thought, where you say, we're going to discover how to change the world and change the challenges that these people have. We're no longer asking, will we revolutionize liver disease treatment? You're basically saying, how are we going to do it and how fast we can do it, right?
Yeah, and you have to have that belief. I mean, you've talked about entrepreneurship a couple of times in the conversation, and that's really what it is. It's about this vision and about this belief and about this drive to get to an answer. And, none of us have a crystal ball, but you believe, and you go through a series of steps to test each of the questions that you ask to see if you're right. And if you're not, what do I need to do to fix it? And how do I get to that end goal, if you will?
Yeah, that's so powerful. And of course, you're an international company. You've got so many people that are working to try and solve this big problem. Let's talk about entrepreneurship. I mean, you've got an incredible entrepreneurial journey. If I spent time just talking about your journey, I'd be here for 30 minutes. We wouldn't have even gotten to the interview. For the younger people watching the show, Dr. Kivlighn, sometimes they hit a roadblock. Sometimes they hit a pothole in the road. Sometimes they just have a challenge they can't get through. I'm hoping maybe you could share some insight to the younger entrepreneurs, Salah, about what it takes to get through a roadblock or a pothole in the road as an entrepreneur and get through it, coming to the other end of it, actually being happy that you went through the problem and solved the challenge.
Yeah. So, a sort of an unending belief in self with a real dose of reality. I had a young man come up to me. I was in Philadelphia over the weekend attending an event, and I had a young man come up to me and ask me kind of the similar question, trying to figure it out. And he asked me about secrets and the success. And I said, well, the one thing you always have is you believe in yourself, but you have to be also honest with yourself. You have to be truthful. And what we don't see about successful people is how many times they fail to become successful. So it's never or rarely a straight line from I was born and now I'm successful. And along the way, you're going to fall down. And that old adage of you pick yourself up, you dust yourself off, and you keep going is how you do it. And I think that's the key. And that's what I tell my two daughters is, believe in yourself, trust yourself, but be honest with yourself.
That's great advice. And of course, for the younger entrepreneurs watching the show, rewind what Salah just said. He just gave you what I'm going to call a Stanford MBA there, a little Stanford mini MBA. I mean, that's great stuff. Salah, what you're doing at HepaTx is remarkable. Congratulations on the journey. We're looking forward to hearing more great things about you and your team and what the entire company is doing. It's such a passion toward really regenerative medicine. It's just powerful, and you're really changing sort of the environment with late stage liver disease, of course, focusing in on this very specific area of the late stage liver disease that's induced by alcohol and alcoholism. And it's just so important what you're doing. I wanted to thank you for coming on the show. We're going to bring you back because there's really so much to unpack here. I want to get more into this entrepreneurial journey that you've had and the way in which leadership starts at the top and the way in which you're able to put together such a great team and surround yourself with really the best in class people that really are out there in the world today. So thank you so much, Salah, for coming on the DotCom Magazine Entrepreneur Spotlight Series today. The time has really gone very quickly, and it's just a great thing that you're doing, and congratulations.
Yeah, and thank you again for having me. It's been a great pleasure to be able to speak with you and share some of this, and I look forward to continuing the conversation.